Well, welcome everyone. We're going to get started with the event here. I'm Eric Hoke, Design Director at the Civic Design Center, and we're really excited to be hosting this virtual forum on Wharf Park today. So this has been a partnership with a variety of people who you'll hear from in a second. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Megan from the FRIS to get us going.
Thank you so much, Eric. I do have some slides here. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Rust, the FRIS Art Museum's Interpretation Director. And although we'd hoped to be together at the FRIS today, we're delighted to be with you all online and to welcome you to today's program. And just as if we were together today at the FRIS, I will begin with a land acknowledgement. The FRIS Art Museum sits on land that the Cherokee and Shawnee Native peoples, elders, and their ancestors called their homeland. We acknowledge and pay respect to them and offer deep gratitude and respect to the land and water that support us. Before we begin, I'd like to share quickly with you all information about the FRIS current and upcoming exhibitions. Now on view in our upper level galleries until January 30th is Medieval Bologna Art for a University City. This is the first museum exhibition in the United States to focus on medieval art made in the northern Italian city of Bologna, which is home to the oldest university in Europe. The FRIS is the exhibition's only venue, so we hope you'll come see this exhibition before these stunning works leave Nashville. Opening next Friday, January 28th, are two exhibitions. On the horizon, contemporary Cuban art from the Perez Art Museum, Miami, and Lysander Bryant, Forget-Me-Nots. In our Ingram Gallery, On the Horizon, features paintings, sculptures, videos, and installations by 50 Cuban artists from multiple generations. And in our Gordon Contemporary Artist Project Gallery, Nashville-based artist Lysander Bryant's debut solo exhibition, Forget-Me-Nots, features photography, his signature wheat paste mural, and a new multimedia installation. And finally, opening next month on Friday, February 25th in our upper level galleries is Alma W. Thomas, Everything is Beautiful. And this retrospective includes an unprecedented number of Thomas's joyful and colorful abstract paintings. Well, so we hope to see you in person soon at the FRIS. Thank you all for inviting us to be a part of this program today. And I will turn things back over to Eric.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. Looks like some exciting stuff over at the FRIS. So I can't wait to go check it out. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm Eric Hoke, the design director at the Civic Design Center. Our mission is basically to advocate for civic design visions and actionable change in communities to promote quality of life for all. So we do that through the support of lots of different entities, but our primary presenting sponsors are Amazon, Global Furniture, and Mars Pet Care. So they really help us do the work. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context, really brief overview of Nashville's riverfront history. I guess as far as I could trace back, there were no formal settlements prior to 1779. And the land was inhabited by several native peoples, but the kind of formal settlements, at least from the settlers' perspective, there was none. I guess in 1784, Nashville was established, or sorry, 1784, Nashville was established. By 1860, there was over 1 million tons of cargo that was loaded onto First Avenue there. And so this kind of was a sign of, you know, the utilizing the river, the active frontage, and you know, the river was a really important part to the formation of Nashville as we know it. Then fast forward a few years to 1909, the Sparkman Street Bridge was formed, so it started to connect the east and west side. And then the kind of industry, the shipping industry, was really took over a lot of the East Bank there, where that started. So Then fast forward again many years to 1996 when the Rolling Mill Hill neighborhood plan was kind of formed and beginning, we're talking about residences in more downtown areas, and especially this one as it relates to Wharf Park area, so just slightly north up the river from the Wharf Park site. This began to be formed as a neighborhood. And then I'd like to point out this one in 1997, the Downtown Partnership released this publication, Connecting with the Invisible Riverfront. So this was, I think just the title is something, it's like trying to acknowledge the river better than we're doing. So then in the 90s, there was a proposal to build an interstate through downtown Nashville, very close to the site where Wharf Park is, but basically where Korean Veterans Boulevard is now. And so this group, the Urban Design Forum, was a group that met regularly to discuss civic issues in Nashville. And they saw this as a threat to development and the development of the city as a whole. And so they proposed this alternative vision known as the Franklin Boulevard, which was kind of a more human scale style design than an interstate, and used it to suggest what the future of that corridor should look like. And so that went on to basically form the Civic Design Center. So from that moment, the Urban Design Forum decided that we needed a more regular group. And so they formed 501c3 known as the Nashville Civic Design Center. And basically the first sort of project that they took on was the Plan of Nashville, which is a document that still guides the work that we do as an organization. And you can see in this cover image, there's a suggestion for park where Wharf Park is, even on the cover of this publication. So out of that came these the guiding principles for civic design, and we've recently updated the guiding principles, and there's kind of two that I'll call out as part of that, which are prioritize design that alleviates impact on the environment, on the natural resources, and expand the parks and greenway system. And so I think that these two are something that we will think about as the Civic Design Center as we go forward. I would really encourage you to go to our website and learn more about the principles. And so this is an image from the Plan of Nashville, and it shows you, again, the site where Wharf Park is at the bottom of the screen here. That was called for even back in the early 2000s when the Plan of Nashville was being written. So then in 1999, the Titan Stadium opens. In 2000, the Cumberland River Greenway Master Plan is published and again tries to get Nashville's connectivity to the riverfront, make it a priority for the work that we're doing. In 2007, the Hargraves Riverfront Master Plan was completed. And then in 2010, we had this very devastating flood on our downtown, which made us had to consider a lot of the issues that the river experiences. And then in 2012, the Cumberland Park on the East Bank, just across from our site, the Wharf Park site, was complete. Meanwhile, the Civic Design Center launched this global design competition called Designing Action, where we asked members from all around the design teams from all around the world to weigh in on ideas for the East Bank in particular, but the winning design here showed a pretty interesting connection to the Wharf Park in Rolling Mill Hill area. Also in 2015, we worked with the University of Tennessee College of Architecture to vision some boathouse ideas along the riverfront, which led to this kind of design by Hastings architecture, which I think may be incorporated into the Wharf Park site. So pretty exciting stuff there. Then in 2015, the Ascend opened, and then in 2016, we launched another publication called Shaping Healthy Communities, which in there proposed this vision for the Blue Way, which connected several important sites along the Cumberland River, including Wharf Park, to the site. And we're currently working on a publication called Activating Waterways that is going to propose some design interventions for some strategic locations along the river. So that publication will be coming soon from the Civic Design Center. So I know that was a lot I just threw at you really quickly. And so that's just a look of what we're working on now. And so, but at this point, I want to turn it over to Tim from Parks to talk about, kind of introduce this project. So take it away, Tim.
Thanks, Eric. I felt like my career and probably a lot of the people on this call, our careers have just flashed before our very eyes with that quick history. Well, thank you, Eric and Joe and Veronica and everybody on the Civic Design Center team for hosting this event today. You guys have always been excellent partners and really effective parks advocates. So I appreciate that and appreciate everybody who's participating in the meeting today. Well, as probably a lot of the people on this call are keenly aware, there is an unprecedented amount of planning on and near the Cumberland River in the downtown corridor these days, and we're really in a period of transformative change. So today, we are thrilled to be able to share with you some information about one such site, Wharf Park, and we hope it'll be entertaining and informative and inspiring. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to the Gina from the agency landscape and planning team. But about a year ago, the Metro Parks Department secured the services of agency out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and their stellar team of planners to help us establish a vision and a future for the Wharf Park site. So Gina Ford, Susanna Ross, and Kimberly Ware are here today, and in a moment I'll turn it over to them. I have a tendency to feel like whatever park project I happen to be working on at any given moment is the coolest and the best. But it's totally true about Wharf Park. This is the coolest and the best project. This aerial view gives you a little bit of site orientation as to where our site is. We've got about 25 acres with incredible character. You know, so many of these other potential park redevelopment sites on the Cumberland River downtown are a little bit of a blank slate. And that's not true at Wharf Park. We've got River Bluff, we've got a quarry, we've got industrial relics, we've got a riparian forest. There's a ton of character, and that presents a ton of opportunities and a ton of challenges. And our opportunity here is to create not just Nashville's next great park, but really one of the country's most significant new waterfront parks. And with that, I will turn it over. Oh, before I turn it over to Gina, this is the second in a series of public engagement events this week. So we're glad to have all of you here today. In addition, if you want to join us for a Facebook Live event, we're hosting that tomorrow at noon, and you can go to the Nashville Metro Parks Facebook page to join us for that. And then this Saturday from noon to 2 at the Napier Community Center, we're going to have an in-person open house. So we'd love to see you there. Okay, with that, I will now turn it over to Gina Ford, founder and principal with Agency Landscape and Planning.
Thanks, Tim. We 100% concur it's the coolest site in Nashville. I'm joined today by Kim Ware and Susanna Ross. We'll take turns at the mic in a moment, but just wanted to have our Charlie's Angels moment and say hello.
Hello.
Since we have the great pleasure of being together, and I have the great pleasure of introducing all of you to Agency, the practice that we three are part of. So Agency is a relatively new practice that started in 2018, but prior to that, it's got actually a very long history of about 2 decades of practice. Previously, many of us, our senior leadership team, including my co-founder Bree Hensoldt and I worked at the firm Sasaki, and there did a lot of the firms had a role and a leadership role in a lot of the firm's public work. And so it's sort of where we all met and fell in love and created an incredible body of work that spanned from built waterfront design and planning to resilience thinking, public space design and activation, and a lot of work with downtowns, American downtowns across the country, and cultural planning. So we have this shared, very long history and portfolio, but we are a new practice. And part of why we wanted to form this new practice is because we felt that there was an interesting model that we wanted to try to build to really accomplish public work that's meaningful to us in a new way, where in kind of previous iterations of design process, planning is often seen as a sort of upfront, upstream part of design, where you do some community engagement and then you create a plan and then it sort of sits there while you try to muster the will to move forward and the fundraising. And then landscape architecture or buildcraft comes in and then realizes the plan and with some more community engagement. And we find that process unsatisfying. And so at agency, we really like to think about urban planning as a strategic layer, landscape architecture as a design and built layer, and community engagement instead as really three parallel streams that are working side by side and not one leading the other, but really hand in hand. And we find in that overlap between the strategic lens that planning brings to the table and the design lens that landscape architecture brings, we can really find this middle ground of community benefit where we're not just planning a park to be successful as a design entity on the first day, but that it can be sustained over the long term, that we're not just building parks that can be created within floodplains, but that are dynamic and capable of being resilient in floodplains. So it's that idea that strategy and design coexist, and at the intersection of them is community benefit. And so we founded this practice called Agency Landscape and Planning, and this is our mission statement. You can read a lot more about us on our website, agencylp.com. But as the name infers, we really believe that people have the power to make change in their environments, and we want our design practice to be one that's all about removing barriers to great design and helping communities to realize their highest and biggest dream for themselves. And so we're a practice of about 16 people today, just 4 years later, and this is our mission statement in its kind of full prose. This is our team out on our beloved Boston waterfront. We are located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, mostly, but in this new world of remote work, we have agents actually all over the country. And that's been a really interesting challenge we can talk about if you all want to later. As I said, community engagement is a wholly part of the work we do. We believe that writing stories with community is a great way of thinking about the work we do, that it's letting the community actually be the author of their own future and giving them the tools to express those ideas and to have a lot of fun in the process. And we've been doing quite a bit of that here in Nashville. In our just 4 years of practice, this is our full kind of body of work. As you can see, it spans the country, and we really are a kind of American city focused practice. And it spans both built work and sort of site design in the green examples, and then planning and strategic thinking as a kind of dominant strain in the purple examples. And so a kind of a really well-balanced portfolio with a lot of geographic emphasis in the Southeast and a lot and growing in the West. We also very much see our role as what we describe as managing change, that we see change all around us, and nowhere is that more perfect than in the last 2 years, where change just seems to be the daily operating procedure. And so we think with forces of great environmental change, with great cultural change, and certainly economic change, design has a really critical role in helping communities to manage that change and to think ahead and to be strategic about how they will adapt and be resilient to such change. So a big medium through which we work is actually waterfront work. It's a specialty of a lot of us in this practice, and we again think about it at both the strategic and built scale. So I wanted to reflect a little bit on the major trends in waterfront work that we see and show you a few examples before we get to Wharf Park of just past work that we've had the pleasure to lead and be part of. I apologize for the graininess of this map. I always show it though because I love it. It's the Red Cross and NOAA disaster risk map for the United States. And as you can see, there's really no place except the upper Midwest that is spared of some form of high risk or moderate risk in the wake of environmental change. And so as we look at Tennessee, we know that that's the case, that it must feel in many ways that you're kind of accosted on all fronts. And so thinking about how to help communities adapt to this incredibly disruptive environmental change is a big part of the way we think about the work. And we knew going into this about the 2010 floods. I remember being here and interviewing for the flood resilience recovery planning after those events, and really being stunned at the amount of destruction of that forest, but also a lot of good planning that's gone in the works to make Nashville more resilient in the future. And we had just kicked off Wharf Park, the Wharf Park master plan, when both the pandemic and the 2020 tornado hit Nashville. So, you know, the idea that these disruptive events are happening more frequently, that they really are taking us, knocking us down, figuring out how we can help communities kind of brush off quicker and bounce back and be more resilient to them is critical. So I wanted to share one example of this, of flood resilience, and this is at the Chicago River Walk, where I had the great pleasure of being the lead designer for the work on the Chicago River alongside Carol Ross Barney of Ross Barney Architects and myself as the design principal for Sasaki. And the great joy of this work was really 6 blocks of the main branch of the Chicago River. The idea was really threading together these 6 blocks, linking together spaces that had been disconnected, creating a continuous public realm, and really thinking about how to reintroduce people to the Chicago River, which for many years they'd kind of been held up and away from because of flood concerns and water quality issues. And so our scheme really centered on this idea that each block of this experience could be diverse, that it could offer diverse kinds of programs, and that each block could really be inspired by a specific water experience. So the marina, the cove, the river theater, the water plaza, and the jetty. And so this was the space we were given when we began the work in 2009, which, as you can see, was sad and derelict and non-continuous, even though Burnham famously had imagined this kind of continuous waterfront experience. The reality was very bleak. And so through many years of hard work and some great government funding, federal funding, we were able to transform that space into, again, this continuous public realm with different kinds of spaces along it. In this case, a kind of dining terrace that allows for people and boats to interact in a really, really direct way. And importantly, you see before people were held up and above and away from the water, and a lot of our work was getting people down close to the water and really welcoming that exchange with the water sheet. And so these different experiences, from those of dining to those of human-powered craft, which are welcome to the cove, to the casual kind of connectivity moments of people strolling along the waterfront, are all part of this kind of dynamic, multi-roomed experience of the river. And really important to this conversation, welcoming people to get closer to the river meant also welcoming the flood dynamic into those spaces. And so every single one of the spaces along the Chicago River Walk is designed to receive those flood waters, to be dynamic. And in this case, the jetty, which was a whole room dedicated to floating wetlands and fish habitat. Those floating wetlands actually sit on the water surface and rise and fall with the dynamics of the Chicago River. And as you can see, it's a way of registering to the community those dynamics, as well as making it kind of a beautiful experience. A second theme, we also see issues of equity across the country. And so issues of equity and park access are really critical to most communities we work with. We know that most people, that there are 100 million people in this country who don't have 10-minute walking access to a park in their community. We know that on the quality front, communities of color have less access to big, beautiful, comfortable parks that provide things like cooling and social distancing, that they tend to have more access to smaller, crowded parks. And as you can see on the right, parks serving majority of people of color communities are much smaller on average than those serving white populations, same with income. And so we can look at a city as a whole and say it's got a great coverage, it's got great park access, but you have to look more closely at who is being served by those parks and how much amenity are actually being offered. And so that's also a lot of the work that we do. It was a lot of the work that we saw Tim and others have the hand in sort of leading a vision for Nashville's park system with the Plan to Play document, which really established, again, a real abundance of recreational acreage as a city, but really recognizing there was a shortage of developed parkland and recreational facilities. And so a lot of what we've been talking about on Wharf, as you'll see in a moment, is how to make sure we're serving the people that don't have that great walking access today. Susanna and I have been working for 4 years now with the city of Sarasota, which has a slightly different equity issue. Their equity issue is that a lot of the waterfront is dominated by private development. So the public doesn't have great public access to this waterfront, yet 53 acres that you're looking at right in front of you is a 53-acre dominantly parked space that the city owns. And so a grassroots kind of citizen group came together to ask for the city to think about making this a signature park for the city of Sarasota. And so we've been working over the past 4 years to have this community engaged process, touching all parts of the community, making sure that they're on board with the vision for the place, and helping us to craft that vision and that story for the place. That's really transforming this 53 acres of mostly hardscaped asphalt parking lot into a much more green vision that knits together a bunch of cultural facilities, including a new performing arts center for the community, new community assets, as well as environmental resilience through a whole ton of stormwater and kind of green infrastructure strategy. We're really happy to say that even though that master plan wrapped up in 2018, we're now in the process of realizing the first 2 phases of construction. Phase 1 is under construction. That's this view you see here, a 10-acre community park on the south side of the site. And we're mobilized to deliver the rest of the majority of the site over the next couple of years. So master plans can lead to quick action if there's momentum and enthusiasm, which there was here. And again, it was really about having that great public access on the waterfront, but also making sure it's amenitized to give people reasons to come back again and again, whether that's through cafe and food offerings or performance and programming, as this image starts to suggest. And then last theme, that of economic development. We see that again and again that cities that invest in their riverfront see a significant return on that investment. Here are just 3 examples in a recent study by Riverfront Parks Now that talks about that return on investment. When you do invest in park spaces, it's a low investment against the economic return you see on investment. And obviously, a lot of times that investment can be disruptive, but a lot of times it can also be really positive and can lead to great public space. We know, and Eric just did a brilliant job of the much bigger overview of the parks, but we know that we're working alongside and have had lots of conversation with the work on the East Bank. So understanding that Nashville's change on the riverfront is much bigger than what's just happening at Wharf Park. There's so much happening, and we know that that change is going to be felt soon, and it's going to be a really interesting time for the city. And so thinking about how to make sure all of these plans are coordinated and that all of these different efforts lead to that diversity of experience, and really making sure that that those spaces really meet the needs of the community was also a critical issue at a recent plan we conducted called the White River Vision Plan. So this was a strategic kind of higher level plan looking at 58 miles of the White River in Indianapolis and Hamilton County, a very urban county and a very rural county that came together around the resource of the White River. And there, again, 13,000 voices participated. It was an intense process of getting out and making sure we listened to the bluest of the blue voices and the reddest of the red voices, and came to a vision that everyone could agree on or could live with and be happy with. And so in this instance, 58 miles, as you think about your whole riverfront, allowed for there to be those distinctly urban experiences of highly developed recreational spaces and connectivity as is envisioned here with the downtown Indianapolis view. And so you see a real emphasis on connectivity, greenways, activation and experience, and also partnerships in these more urban reaches, really imagining places that could be community hubs, bringing people together by the river's edge and really celebrating the life on the water sheet, as we call it, but also making sure that there were really distinct places for environmental quiet and intimacy, such as at this northern reach called Strawtown Kateway, which was an existing park we really wanted to see enhanced to include more activation and association with the river. And so in this instance, it was really about those quieter uses, those kind of recreational uses that were a little bit more intimate in scale, and a whole series of environmental restoration to make it a healthy and green environment. So with that, I'm going to now pivot to the team and talk more specifically about the work underway at Wharf Park, but just wanted to give you the context of the work we've done in the past and some of the issues we think about. And that is the experience that we have brought to bear as we have had the great pleasure of working on Wharf Park. I'll turn it over now to Susanna.
Thank you, Gina, and hello, everybody. Very happy to be here. You all, as Eric outlined, this has been a piece in a puzzle that's been looked at for decades, and so we're just kind of the latecomers to the party, but we're really excited to be thinking about it. Agency is leading a team that is much greater than us. We have local partners at HDLA, at Barge Cawthon, at BDY Environmental, and then Moffitt and Nickel to help us with marine engineering issues. It's a complex site, and so we have sort of marshaled all the resources we think we need to come up with a master plan that really encompasses a full and well thought through vision for Wharf Park. We are here in January 2022 after some fits and starts with COVID and other things. We are sort of back on track. We began with a phase of discovery, some analysis. You'll see some highlights there. We had some great community discussions with key stakeholder groups, as well as sort of just the public at large. And again, you'll see some highlights from that phase of work. From that community feedback, we came up with the 3 schemes that you'll see today, and we would love to hear from you on what you think about those. And then the plan is to take the feedback that we get now and spend the next few months with our big team, synthesizing the feedback, refining the plan, and coming back with a master plan that lays out costs, that lays out phasing, that really in the kind of agency model takes us right from planning into executing and implementing. So we're very excited about that. So stay tuned to be back with us in May to see where we end up. Our site, as many of you may be familiar, has some really amazing assets that we think are unique to it as a downtown park in Nashville, between the river access, the legacy of the quarries, which really leave us with these really interesting sort of relics and topography that we think we can take advantage of. The floodplain forest is a sort of lush greenness that we don't see in many other spots in Nashville, and so we want to capture that. And then the bluff, which is, if you've been to the site, just amazing and sort of stunning to behold, and the railway at the bottom of it, all give this a fairly unique spot within the ecosystem of Nashville parks. As we approached both our analysis and our community outreach, we like to not just sort of present a bunch of facts and figures, but actually think about how to tell a story about the site. And so we couched our analysis and our outreach to the community in these 4 categories, thinking about how folks will use this park as a means of river access, as a point along a much greater greenway system, as a park, a sort of neighborhood park, what's going to keep people coming back over and over. And then lastly, this sort of wild card, make it your own category, just to help get us to think about how people will sort of help shape the character of this new space. Like what should this be, and how can folks make it their own, and how can we have that influence the design that we come up with. And so Eric gave a really good history of Nashville as a whole. We, of course, dug into that as it relates to our site. And of course, there's a long and layered history, starting, of course, with early people and sort of natives, sort of occupation of the area, and habitation of the area, I should say. And it sort of has morphed throughout the years from a place of utility with the waterworks, with the railroad, with the sort of sawmills on the river, and a divided place when the interstate came along. And we know also now that there's a current kind of history of the site, which is for people who don't have a place to live, and so are transitioning. And we are planning for a park, but simultaneously understanding that those sort of that population really needs a place to go and a way forward. And while that's not part of our process, it is ongoing, and we're working with the city, with Metro, to make sure that that we address such concerns. And so looking at this through that first lens of of the site as a river. Of course, we have to look at the water systems, the adjacent commercial uses. This is still, as you can see in the pictures in the lower right-hand side there, very much a waterway that gets used for commercial purposes. It's also, as the map on the upper right shows, a place that floods. It's a floodplain. We know that, and we know at the 100-year flood elevation and 500-year flood elevation that we can expect to see flooding. And so our design will have to factor that in terms of what can withstand inundation and what can't. Next, just looking at parks and where this fits within the context of, we expect this will be a neighborhood park. And so the neighborhoods we are serving, we expect, will be from across Nashville, but particularly those that are kind of at closest as the crow flies, I should say. Rolling Mill Hill sits right there at the top of that bluff looking down at the park. And Napier-Suticum is actually, of course, separated by the highway, but we've got sort of a pedestrian overpass that we think can provide a great link to this park and make this a real resource for the Napier-Suticum community that they don't currently have. And so we want to enhance that connection, figure out how to make it better and really a more sort of practical place for people to go on a regular basis. And then the Greenway lens, we see that there's an amazing network of both existing and planned connections within the greater Nashville Greenway. And it's lovely for us that Wharf Park falls sort of smack in the middle of all of it. And so while at the moment this site is fairly inaccessible, we know that going forward, people will want to get there by foot, on bike, by bus and car. And so our plan is thinking through that in a lot of different ways. You'll see many different ways of looping into the site as we get to the schemes that we're going to show you today. And so with that, I'm pleased to hand it over to Kimberly, who will talk about some of the outreach we've done to date and what we heard that helped shape our options that we'll show today.
Thank you, Saz. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim. I'm a landscape designer with agency. And yeah, Wharf has been really fun so far. We've done community outreach once already last summer. Last August, we came and had 2 sessions in that community that we were just talking about, Napier-Suticum, where we had about 55 attendees, and the Howard School. It's more closer to downtown with 52 attendees. So we're trying to capture sort of a larger population that would be using this park in the future. And so we had quite a few comments, so over 400 comments were recorded. We had over 100 attendees, all different ages and coming from all different backgrounds, and it was really fun and interactive event there. But 2 key groups that I think showed up in droves because they sort of had a key issue that they wanted to communicate through this park and through our community outreach. First off was the Open Table Nashville Advocacy Group. Their sort of main concern is, like Susanna said, we know that there are unhoused communities that are currently occupying the site as it is today, sort of under the bridge and within the floodplain area. And so their main concern is what will happen to those groups once the park does come in. And so what kind of resources the park can provide, but also sort of where they might go when this place is no longer accessible to them. And then secondly, the Nashville Rowing Club, sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum. They're really excited about I think Eric talked about it earlier, about the opportunity to have a boathouse here, where they can not only have training facilities for their club, but also allow for education opportunities for the local community and really make it a community space. And so those were the 2 main constituents, I think, that we saw at the last meeting, and we were seeing a little bit more of that this week. We just had our first meeting showing the design options yesterday, and both of these communities were present as well, but welcome the whole community to give their feedback as well. And so just a summary of what we sort of talked about. So we sort of set up the engagement stations in the same way that Susanna was just mentioning, with the identity, river, and greenway, and sort of getting people's comments based on those key areas. And so in terms of what people wanted to see for the identity of the park, it really centered around having a space for youth recreation. So we know we want this to be a neighborhood park where kids can go to after school, and just having a place where they can sort of spend their time and sort of have access to outdoor, to open space and greenery, and be allowed to have a place to go outside of their home. And so future access from those neighborhoods that are close by Napier, and concerns about the social welfare of the currently unhoused people on site is a main concern with the identity of the park in the future. In terms of river access, like we said, we had a lot of rowers that came out, so they were definitely interested in having dedicated space for human-powered watercraft, paddle watercraft, etc. And we know we want to have a diversity of water uses there, so human-powered watercraft, including kayaks and paddle boards, as well as the rowing is important to people as well. Water safety, considering this is also a commercial waterfront, was an important thing that people mentioned, and passive river viewing as well, not necessarily always getting into the water, but having a space to just take in the vistas and potentially look towards downtown from this site. For park access, in addition to water, people really wanted to see skate parks on the site. I think they were sort of interested in having a more regional skate park destination that's closer to the neighborhood, as well as nature programming and education, and 24 access facilities and water safety came up there as well. Lastly, as far as the Greenway Connections, we definitely wanted, again, to have connections to the local neighborhood through typical multimodal transportation, whether it's through bus, the bike system, or being able to walk to the park, but also having this connection through programming and partnerships, so people actually have something to do when they get to the park, and it has some connection to what they do in the neighborhood and at home. And so we love models. We had a great sort of central piece at the last set of public meetings that was sort of showing people the existing park site to really give a sense of what that topographical change is on the site. There's about 100 feet of change from the top of the bluff to the bottom, and about 60 to 80 feet of change just at that bluff edge. So we really wanted to communicate how unique the site is for that reason. And sort of, we had this activity where people were placing these flags to show that they were excited about, but what also was giving them sort of concerns about a potential park site here. And so of those, we had more areas of opportunity flags than we did of concern. I think the main concerns were about trying to bridge the gap in the community access to the park, providing safety for people who are on the water, and also, once again, the concerns about where the unhoused community will go from the site. But also focusing on this park as a neighborhood park and not necessarily the sort of tourist destination like a lot of downtown parks are today. In terms of areas of opportunity, people just really wanted to live in nature and have access to outdoor classrooms, climbing, education experiences, and just sort of equitable opportunities for everyone who's coming to the park, community gardens, etc. And so with all of that feedback compiled, we spent at least the last 4 to 5 months putting together these 3 schemes that we're going to show you today. And we've already had a little bit of feedback yesterday, but there's some excitement about each of the schemes that I think after the set of public meetings today, it'll kind of be more of a Frankenstein of them, of things that people find interesting about each of them. So we'll sort of go into them now. I'll turn it back over to Gina. I'm going.
Kim and I are going to tag team these, but I should say her genius is throughout, as well as an incredible team that includes, as we mentioned, HDLA, who'd made some really beautiful models that are part of the in-person engagement. So if you want to see those, please come out on Saturday. So we'll take the last few minutes here just to walk through these 3 design options, starting with river forest. We wanted to start with a scheme that really took the forest as our inspiration. As mentioned, mentioned, it's a really important part of the identity of the site, the kind of forest cover. And so we began with a notion of what if we really let the design, the existing site and some of the traces of its industrial history and the existing forest inspire us. And so some ideas here are that each of the program kind of nodes within this space are really these clearings within the existing forest, which we imagined both enhancing through exotic invasive removal, hardwood planting, but also some new tree planting and preservation of large canopy trees, really thinking about a distribution of program elements that allows for these kinds of rooms within the forest. We also imagined, as you can see, this Greenway Ridge, which is both across the middle of the site, but also a T, is really taking advantage of some existing ridgeline topography that runs through the site. So allows us a kind of high and dry space that is a clear way of distinguishing the site. And then really imagining that the upper landscape of the quarry, and we should mention the Historic School for the Blind is a property that the Metro Parks Department has been looking at and contemplating the potential for adaptive reuse of that facility. It's not a sure thing, but it would be really lovely to think about how that facility could start to be park supporting in some of its uses or park adjacent. And so here we imagined a kind of community green and a much more kind of water inspired quarry landscape that was more of a respite in nature. And so just to walk through some of the really special parts of this scheme, first, the systems circulation, as you can see, is continuous with the Greenway really snaking through and becoming part of that ridgeline system I described, a secondary circuit that really moves you through all of those clearings. Really working to preserve as much forest as possible, but then thinking about how to plant and kind of supplement that to really create great spaces within the park. A series across the bottom that really shows where we start to see character and program distributing here, these kinds of pockets of spaces with different recreational uses, potentially play spaces, court spaces, lawn spaces that are more passive. And that really the views of the forest and the views through the forest out to the river become the character defining pieces, as well as that bluff, which we are smitten with. And you'll see 3 different ways we approached it. An idea we're really excited about. The quarry as this upper landscape of kind of rough hewn terraces made through industry with these traces of these old foundations of the kind of tanks that were there previously. As you can see with these circles, we wanted to make a scheme that really honored that trace and use that as a kind of a layer of an industrial water garden that could even have a kind of water overlook where water could spill from that upper school for the blind down, whether it was stormwater or recirculating water, just something that really celebrated the presence of water and potentially even brought some of the native cedar glade landscape of Tennessee into this space because of its kind of rocky, craggy identity and character. We imagined also in the lower floodplain, we're going to move through each of these zones with you for the 3 schemes, that in this scheme, the forest would really be the celebrity and that the Greenway Ridge line would become this unifying promenade framed on both sides by trees, a kind of formal LA that brought you through the forest and also opened up views into these pockets of places and spaces, a picnic area, playgrounds nestled in the forest, a kind of playground and pump track for tots, kind of a wonderland for kids that are just learning how to walk. And then a flexible lawn space that perches right over the river's edge. And then lastly, in each scheme, we've been working with our partners at Hastings Architecture, as well as the rowers, to think about where and how this community boathouse becomes an anchor on this site. And so here it's adjacent to the Silman Evans Bridge, taking advantage of the underbridge for some distributed parking. So there's driving access down and some parking under the bridge connected to that Greenway Ridge system. And this plaza and community boathouse operates kind of on 2 levels, the upper level that addresses the Greenway Ridge, and then the lower level that addresses the river with some limited boat storage and floodable lower level on kind of that condition. And so imagining a multi-use launch that really enables the boathouse and novice rowers to get familiar with the Cumberland. And just a few of the precedent images. This flume fountain by Stimson Associates is just one of the most lovely examples of this kind of water drop that we could imagine something like that happening in the quarry and really celebrating that verticality. And then some other examples of these kind of recreational spaces that really take advantage of their woodland context for character.
All right. And so our second scheme here, Bridge and Bowl, is really an iconic neighborhood park that kind of creates these two central moments. The bowl here, which becomes this large community lawn that's sort of flexible for field sports or just a space for community events to happen, people to come and relax and see and be seen on the large lawn on the riverfront. And then on the opposite end, we really wanted to activate this sort of narrower side of our site here, because there's this fantastic connection to Academy Place, which is directly adjacent to the pedestrian bridge that connects over to Napier Sudicum, the community that we're trying to focus on for this park access. And so from that Academy Place connection, we wanted to create this sort of iconic bridge moment that's sort of an icon that can be seen from within the park, but also outside of the park from downtown, and allows for people to sort of snake down onto the western edge of the site where we've created this sort of Boathouse riverfront access campus. And there is sort of where we have a little bit of riverbank manipulation just to create this small sort of safe harbor for people of all experience levels and all different types of human-powered watercraft to launch from, and sort of have this sort of moment of safety before they go out into the main stem of the river. And as for sort of our approach to the quarry here, we wanted to create this sort of area where all of the neighborhood recreation pieces are clustered, so that, you know, we know that it takes a lot to amble down into the floodplain from the top of the bluff here. So people who are coming to the park will have sort of immediate access to these play areas for various ages of kids. People can really grow up playing here in those three different spaces. And so with the bridge and bowl options, so our main circulation stem is this sort of beautiful S-curve that we really love, continuing the Greenway down through the park before it goes to the east. And sort of that main vehicular transportation follows that access as well. For the environment, we wanted to preserve, again, as much of the forest as possible, but I think in this one we have a little bit more planting, just create a more formal park experience, framing views and the such. And so as far as the character of the site, as I said, the sort of two main moments that we wanted to highlight were this large oval lawn for the community that sort of can be rated to have views towards downtown and towards the river, that just becomes this really spectacular moment, as well as the bridge to the waterfront, where you also have views sort of all over from the park. And sort of the activities and use, so the more active uses are sort of clustered in the quarry, the sport lawn that can be flexible, and the courts underneath the bridge. And sort of between that, you have these more passive picnic spaces and trails that people can have a more quiet moment to experience that existing forest on site. And so here in the quarry is where we're creating sort of that larger regional skate park. It's about 30,000 square feet. And that just creates this really cool backdrop with the quarry wall, having some bowls and some street skating opportunities for people to come here and enjoy that amenity, but also having other play areas for people of other ages and ability levels. And then for the bowl is sort of this larger flexible lawn that can be, like I said, used for field sports, but also can just be this sort of nice place to rest and relax and sort of come and enjoy this sort of open space for the community, as well as sort of this ring around the bowl that can be sort of used for picnic areas or seating opportunities to look into the lawn, sort of have various experiences within the center of the park there. And then here with the boathouse, sort of this ambitious bridge that kind of snakes down from the top of the bluff down into the boathouse area that, as Gina said, is sort of this two-level approach, having the upper level be more for the community and for events and training, whereas the lower level is more for boat storage and is floodable for that purpose as well. And here's just some precedent images that we were thinking about for the character of this site, sort of this really iconic bridge that we really love, that the community really liked last night, just that can be seen from all areas of the city and in the park, while also having this really interesting skate park experience and the colorful courts underneath the bridge as well. And so I'll pass it to Gina to cover our last.
To bring us home.
Yes.
Okay, so our last scheme is called the Wetland Braid. And we started this scheme by thinking about how to create basically safe spaces for novice folks who want to get out onto the river. And so we began with the idea of carving a water space through the site. As you can see, a kind of low and lovely channel that moves through the site that creates a kind of forested island here, and then really sets up a kind of boat launch that becomes part of the more interior core of the project. You see this kind of launch to plaza to lawn to boathouse condition here that becomes the kind of main organizing formal access within the park. But then beyond that, really much more naturalized outdoor classroom spaces and sort of nature experience spaces and more quiet. So this one is much more on the kind of natural end of the spectrum. As Kim mentioned in the previous scheme, really thinking about the underbridge is a great opportunity for a skate park in the scheme. Again, a $25,000 kind of 25,000 square foot, more than $25,000 skate park that could really serve the region as well as the local neighborhoods, as well as a whole slew of potential hardcore sports and parking. In this scheme, we imagined that the upper landscape of the quarry could also be more naturalized, but here really celebrated as a kind of adventure, kind of extreme adventure play space. And so climbing walls and overlooks and adventure play, an adventure tower where the existing Rolling Mill Hill Greenway ends that allows you to vertically circulate and potentially experience some fitness benefit into that quarry landscape, while the Greenway then continues to snake through the site. So as always, the Greenway becomes this kind of unifying circulation. The road comes off of Hermitage down through the site into the parking beneath the bridge, secondary paths and nature trails outside of that kind of main formal spine. We love this notion of this kind of layered planting experience, that you move from the more riparian kind of wetland edge to the more riparian forest to the more upland forest, and that could be experienced as a transect to the site. And that, as I mentioned, the kind of formal activities really happen at the center and in those kind of pockets of the underbridge and the quarry landscape, leaving a majority of the site left to more natural experiences. And then just really thinking about the kind of ability to frame views through this different layers of forest out to the waterfront as being really key to the identity of this scheme. Here, we imagine taking advantage of that vertical grade change as a kind of fitness extreme sport element. So maybe there's some standing climbing walls that mirror the quarry walls. The quarry walls are too soft themselves to be climbed on, but we could make it a kind of backdrop to that activity with more architecturalized kind of vertical circulation built into that, with overlooks and adventure towers. And that's nestled into this space of other adventure play amenities, as well as places to just sit and relax within the landscape. This kind of central defining feature of the carved out water course becomes really that, again, that kind of central spine of kind of public gathering and kind of higher impact to the site, with potential boat storage kind of framing that space, really letting that kind of water access be the central identity giver and kind of centerpiece of this park, as you can see, but having it also have some smaller amenities built into it to make it really a campus. I love that description of it in the previous scheme. And then beyond that centralized part of the site, really looking to create quiet, lovely spaces within the forest that allow you to have that access to the river, but maybe more intimacy, bird watching, quiet space, maybe resting in the forest with much smaller kind of pockets of experience as you move through that more remote western edge of the site. And just some examples of this kind of idea, that even though this scheme is more disruptive, I think, to the existing forest than some of the other schemes, it does introduce a whole series of kind of wetland and native plant habitats that could be quite interesting as a park setting, and has this layer of kind of experience and adventure that we think could be quite exciting when brought together with this kind of natural identity. And so that's it. Those are the three schemes after much toil and love. These are where we stand. We're here over this kind of 5-day engagement, really listening to the community about what what is desired, what's resonating, what's disliked, and we've heard a whole range so far. We don't have any tallies to share with you just yet. We did for the community, we have these models that show the topography and sort of game boards for folks to give us input, but we also did give this quick kind of evaluation matrix just to show the community the different acreages of different amenities versus, level of impact, passive versus active. So really just wanting to give some metrics to support the distinctions between the schemes to help aid in evaluation. And we provided, as part of that work, a scorecard that both summarizes the work, but also gives the community an option or the ability to weigh in on the schemes through the lens of the principles that we established early in the process of connectivity, of character, of environment, environmental health, and activity and use. And so we welcome all of you to use this bit.ly link or the QR code that's on the screen right now to access this scorecard, and it's kind of Google form version. So you'll see much the same information and give us your feedback on what you think is most resonant of the three schemes. We're really excited to hear from you both in the chat now, but also through your comments. And please do feel free to share this with friends. So just one last note to say, this is the end of this presentation, but we will have a Facebook Live discussion tomorrow over lunch, and then the Napier Community Center in-person gathering from noon to 2 on Saturday. And so if you'd like to come see the models and be part of the hands-on experience of the schemes, we welcome you. And so with that, I think I'm going to stop sharing screen and turn it over and start talking through some of the questions. I see we have 20 chats and 8 questions, so I'm just going to take a minute to maybe welcome our facilitator back, Eric.
Yeah. And so that was a really exciting presentation. I'm so thrilled to just see these, some of them for the first time. And so I'm pretty amped about it. Just having been thinking about it for some time during my time at the Civic Design Center. So really excited to see some of these visions. And so I guess what we'll ask, if maybe it'd be nice to hear from people in person. And I know Remy from our team I think he asked the first question anyway. So we can ask people if they're comfortable, if they want to use the raise hand button on their Zoom screen. And then we can ask, and we can also read from the chat, but might be nice to hear from a few folks. So Remy, are you able to come off mute? I think I allowed you to talk.
Yes. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Great presentation. I loved all the schemes. It's very exciting to see those visions come to life. And a main question I have was, how do you go about talking to the public about the importance of floodplains and the idea of you're introducing a park to them, but potentially a big portion of that design might go just solely to the natural element and how it can engage with the water and creating those floodplains for the economical sense as opposed to the engagement part. So I'm wondering how do you go about that discussion where getting the importance of that to the people that might not necessarily know how important it is to maintain that type of ecosystem, and at the same time providing spaces where they could possibly engage with that.
Yeah, I think it's a great, do you mind if I start, friends? And when I think about that, Remy, I think about two things. I think about how do you explain that in the course of the planning process and make that clear. And so at the models last night, and as you saw through the slide deck, really making sure that it's clear that we all understand that this is a floodplain site, that welcomes in the great experience of touching the Cumberland River, but comes with it also the challenge of knowing how to design and plan for the unexpected storm events. So I think that's just part of the visual communications you see us doing, as well as the in-person dialogue over the models we had last night, showing people kind of where the flood comes to and what that would mean and why we don't put certain amenities into that lower flood zone. And then I think from a design perspective, that's a super rich question. And I think that we're really big fans of experiential design where you really put people into those experiences, like the Chicago example of the floating wetlands, or some of the work we're doing in Sarasota right now, where we have these trails that have interpretive moments that aren't all about, speaking to people's head with signage that they read, but also just speaking to their heart through visceral experience of great landscape space that also helps to build that stewardship over time. And so, we haven't gotten to the level of thinking here about that so much at a master plan level, but I think each of the schemes gives us a really lovely starting point to think about how to build those kinds of experiences in. You have anything to add?
Yeah, and I think the site is a really unique opportunity too, because we do have so much of it in the floodplain, but we also have that Quarry bluff that we can place programs onto, so people can still be able to access the park even when it is a bit flooded. And I think that's one of the benefits of, I think, the second scheme, where we have a lot of those neighborhood uses sort of up in the quarry, so that during all times of the year, people can access those playgrounds and sort of neighborhood amenities pretty easily. And I think we consider that with the boathouse placement as well. We talked about having that sort of bi-level approach of the floodable lower level, but the upper level that's sort of out of the flood and still accessible at any time. So sort of starting to think about how we're placing the programs on the site relative to the floodplain, and grading will come later in the next phase, but that's definitely something that we're considering, I think, with the design options.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any other hands, so we'll just go to the question box. And it looks like Marcus Brooks was curious about some of the combined sewer overflow system management, and then what happens when the public might not be allowed in the water after one of these big rains that we've had recently.
Maybe I can give that one a shot. We've had multiple meetings with Metro Water Services and Metro Stormwater talking about there's a lot of actual stormwater infrastructure on the site and some outflows on and near our site. It is an important issue. Overall, water quality in the Cumberland has gotten vastly better over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. So one of the advantages of having the boathouse on this site, a staffed facility, is for the rowing clubs, they're monitoring water quality very closely. So, when there are flood events, when there are big events downtown, when they are aware of water quality issues, they're not going to get in the water. The other component of the boathouse will be a public concessionaire for kayaks, paddleboards, things like that. And they also monitor all of those conditions. More broadly, currently anybody who wants to get in the water with their own kayak or canoe or whatever can. And so that becomes a little bit more difficult to control.
All right, well, that sounds good. Glad I think there were a few questions actually about the quality of water. So it's good to know there's other groups out there that are thinking about that type of stuff as it relates to this park, and I guess many other areas along the Cumberland too. So
yeah, they used to say that if your windshield wipers are on, don't get in the Cumberland. And that has happily changed pretty significantly in recent years.
Yeah, I've actually been swimming in the Cumberland. I'm fine. So.
Yeah.
So the next question is, and you might have mentioned this, but was there any consideration to include a dog park in the concepts?
Wasn't anything that came up in the dialogue as a desired program. We really tried to stay true to what we heard from the community outreach and align the program, and also really make sure the three schemes were very comparable in the program offered, since that was something that came directly from the community. Any thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, I was really surprised that we have not so far heard more about dog parks, because that is to be expected during public engagement. So it's not in the program of any of these schemes. It probably makes sense for us to think really seriously about it. It's certainly consistent with Plan to Play to add. We know Nashville needs more dog parks, so it could be a good fit. Dog parks are not a good fit in the floodplain.
It seems
Speaking of water quality, so I think it's some good input.
Great. So the next question is actually something that I was pretty interested in. I did love the connection to Academy Place, just thinking about that Greenway network and thinking about the connection to Napier. I thought that was a great suggestion. So this question comes from Tylen, and he was wondering if there was a reason why Academy Place isn't connected in for the bridge over in schemes 2 and 3 in your presentation.
I mean, in the second scheme where we do have the bridge, it's, I think, quite ambitious to think about putting a bridge coming off of the bluff, just because of the extreme topography there, and so being in such a tight part of the site on the western end. But we have, been thinking about making that connection to the pedestrian bridge from, I think it's Lindsley Avenue, that sort of intersection that comes through onto Hermitage is sort of the main entrance into the site. And so since we do have that pedestrian bridge connection to Lindsley, we wanted to sort of hopefully create a more pleasant urban streetscape experience from Lindsley to the park. So there's sort of clear directionality from the pedestrian bridge to Wharf. So,
and we also, I think, philosophically like showing different options, and if something like that resonates, if we had in all 3 schemes, it would start to feel like it was baked in. And this way, if the community likes it, if we get resonance from you, and we did hear quite a bit about liking another connection besides the main entrance, that gives us a little bit more. We like showing very different things so we can gauge where people fall on that spectrum.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So thinking about we have this other great riverfront park that's just down the road, geographically very close, but obviously topography is a little challenging to connect. But thinking about the West Riverfront Park with Ascend Amphitheater and some of the amenities there, as well as the WeGo rail station, the Star. Is there? I guess this question is from Ashley, but how will I guess this could literally bridge on the last comment, but yeah, how will those kind of amenities be connected? And I guess the wider park system as well.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have the connection with the Rolling Mill Hill Greenway that I think goes directly to those downtown parks. But also there's been some discussion. So the Music City Star is more of a commuter rail that people use to get downtown. And so there's been some discussion about potentially having a stop at Wharf Park that allows for that connection to happen. So those are 2 ways, both through the Greenway and the rail. And I think since it is a commuter rail, I saw another question about sort of the horn and noise conflicting with the program of the park. I think it's not as active as maybe a freight commercial rail would be. So it's kind of like a more welcome version of a train that would go through the park that can also provide some access, I think.
And I think it's a great question, and it's an interesting one about the relationship of amenity between those park spaces, because those parks that you mentioned feel very much of downtown, right? And I think this one does want to feel more like we keep describing it as a neighborhood park on the river, and so a little bit more naturalized space, not big, sort of massively connected to hordes of people, is actually a really positive thing, we think, to kind of preserve its intimacy and quiet too.
If I could, excuse me, if I could add on the trail connectivity, ideally we would have that the existing Rolling Mill Hill Greenway at the top of the hill and a lower parallel Greenway trail that runs parallel to the railroad tracks. So far, we have not detected, after meetings both by the Parks Department and other metro agencies, receptiveness on part of the Railroad Authority to do a rail width trail there. So our other option for a lower trail is to probably to do some kind of structural boardwalk that in the old 2007 Riverfront plan, people called it walk on water, some kind of boardwalk outside of the railroad right of way, and it gets super tight in there. But we have not yet fully studied that section of the river frontage in order to determine the feasibility of that connection. Going upstream, the Cumberland River Greenway master plan, would continue the trail upstream, which is east, and we're really close to the mouth of Browns Creek, and we're not that far from the mouth of Mill Creek. And then the other piece of the Greenway network to be developed that this would be a key hub for is the City Central Greenway, which basically parallels the interstate loop.
Wow, I mean, it's the implications of connectivity through this park are really exciting. I think just Tim did a great job just kind of mentioning all those connections that are potentially made right here. And then also, thinking about the public transit and how it works in and maybe future development right next door. So I think those are all really exciting parts of this to consider. The next question from Teresa is about event capacity at the park. Like what type and maybe other, maybe flexible, like those flexible spaces. I think she mentions farmers market, food trucks, 5K and bowl events. Are those on the table for this?
Yeah, go ahead. You're gonna go? No, I was just gonna say we started this process by looking at a number of neighborhood parks of this scale in comparable cities and ones that we've had the pleasure of being part of, and benchmarked parking and how much parking should be in this park, and then we cross-reference that also with the rowers and that program and understanding it. And so we very much are shooting for something like 100 parking spaces on the site, and maybe there'll be more potential parking in Rolling Mill Hill in a long-term view that could allow some sort of Greenway node parking. But again, seeing it as much more of a neighborhood park, we want to put a lot of emphasis on walkability, bicycle connections, and alternative transportation, and really, and I don't know, Tim, if you agree with this, but really not overbuild parking to incentivize this becoming kind of an event space, but really making sure that it preserves that community neighborhood park character. And so defensive parking strategy maybe, but what do you think, Tim?
No, that's great. I would just add, since this is an audience of design and planning geeks, we were thrilled to find out that the city will be acquiring 88 Hermitage, which is the property that contains the historic African American School for the Blind. And some portions of that site are being incorporated into Wharf Park. And so I would invite all of you to look at that existing front lawn between Hermitage Avenue and the School for the Blind, and envision what that could be. That there's so much opportunity there as a community green for farmers markets, or a lot of other kind of community-based events. And I think it's going to end up being a really prime space within the park.
Yeah, I think this is a follow-up question. Which plan is? Do you have an idea of walking mileage and which plan might yield the most?
We actually do. In that evaluation matrix I showed earlier, we quantified for the community how much how many miles of trail connection there was, and they were roughly similar, about an acreage of kind of trail landscape, as we called it, which is landscape that allows for that kind of walking access. The river forest scheme has the most Greenway miles at like 1.66, so 1 2/3 miles, and Wetland Braid has the least at 1 1/3. So it's roughly comparable with Bridge and Bowl right in the middle, about 1.5 miles. And so, yeah. Happy to provide you with those exact numbers since we have them.
Yeah, that's great. I guess the next question I think we kind of addressed, and then I guess yeah, I think we talked about the next two really. Have you had past projects where you worked with larger homeless population? Your comments, your comments about I guess your past work on those concepts were intriguing to some of our guests. So can you expand on that kind of thought?
I can a little bit, and Tim, welcome you as well. Pretty much every park space we work on in every part of the country, but particularly in the kind of southeast where the weather is warm. In Boston, we have less of a homeless issue, or it's less visible in our downtown, partly because it's an inhospitable place. But in places like Denver, where we've worked, or Los Angeles, Austin, big populations of homeless populations that become a really integrated part of the planning process. And every time a park goes from either an unimproved state to an improved state, or is renovated for new uses, it does mean that the population oftentimes that's there, that's unhoused, is displaced in some ways. And so the most recent example is the work we did at Moore Square in Raleigh, which was a 4-acre park downtown. And that had been the place of a lot of food distribution to the homeless on weekends over many years. And so, and the park had really become a place, and I'll say this is what Wharf Park feels like today, where some populations feel very comfortable there today, and some populations will not go into that space because it feels uncomfortable. And so it was very much the same environment in Raleigh. And we always aimed that the park work should welcome everyone to feel safe in the space, and that it's really a place that as a public park belongs to everyone. And so, you know, we feel we feel like parks are really the front line for homelessness issues in cities, even though they really don't have, sorry, Tim, not to insult you, but it's not really the expertise of parks or park planners or park designers specifically to deal with the issues of homelessness. And so we've really relied on Metro's Department of Homeless Impact to have that conversation and to talk about what the right process is for this park moving forward. So Tim, I'm sure you have comments as well.
I think that was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, you know, we're working very closely with Metro Social Services Homeless Impact Division. They've been at all of the public meetings. You know, the Parks Department wants to be, you know, compassionate and cooperative and collaborative in working with these housing and service agencies. It's outside of our kind of mission and area of expertise. So we are working with these partners to help respond in a responsible way.
Yeah, and I think I did get one other question, and I think it's related in a way, I guess. But is there specific consideration for those with disabilities as part of the plan? I guess, do you have initial thoughts on how that might be incorporated into the design?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've definitely would aspire to have all of our programs accessible to people of all different abilities. And I think that especially comes in with how we choose which type of water access we would like to move forward with. And I think there's another question about water access and safety that's coming up next, but the three schemes sort of have three different approaches to water access. And I think Wetland Braid being the most accessible option, but I think even in River Forest, where it's probably the least accessible for novice rowers or people using kayaks and other watercraft, we'd still like to make that accessible to people of all different abilities. So that's definitely something that's important to us.
And I would add just that circulation will be key. And so the idea of a really seamless, low grade, safe walk from upper Rolling Mill Hill to the lower park, thinking about all of those. We work in some communities that forbid park stairs that really require all circulation to be ramp or slope walk. And so here, because we have such expanses of space, I think that's something we could shoot for as a goal, that really no place is limited in its experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll add quickly, you know, baseline, everything in our parks are required to meet ADA, but that is really a kind of a minimal standard. So as we move forward into design phases, I think inclusive design is going to be really important. There's a lot around that with regard to playgrounds and the types of equipment that are selected and designed for playgrounds, but there are tons of opportunities here, as these guys said, with the water access and the other program components to do some cool, to create some cool opportunities that don't exist yet in Nashville.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have time for one more question. Another one from Ashley here. This is kind of a moment in the river where, well, we mentioned the barge traffic and everything and boats, and it's also a big a bend in the river. Is there a consideration for maybe some boater education or working with maybe the barge traffic and having consideration for the park and how the river will be used there?
Yeah, for sure. We understand that is a big component of what we're going to be dealing with here. Conversations started, as a lot of things did with this project, way before we even came to town, and discussions with the Army Corps, with the barge operators. I think the thinking is that within the spectrum of spots that you could do this in downtown Nashville, that this is the best one in some ways, because it's so close to the Silman Evans Bridge. You get the protection from the abutments there, which barge operators are clearly already trying to avoid. That it gives you a little bit of a buffer zone there where you're kind of assured that you won't have that conflict. And one of our schemes where we pull the boathouse further to the west, we're similarly trying to keep it within the sort of shelter, if you will, of the two existing kind of dolphins that are there. But it's definitely, I think we've also heard from the rowers that they aim to make that part of their kind of educational offerings is, how to be safe in the river and how to deal with the commercial traffic that's going to be there. Would you add anything? That's great.
Great. Well, that's exciting. It's good to know there's some kind of protections already there in place, ready to go for the park to be ready. So we at the Civic Design Center greatly appreciate you all taking the time to chat with us. Thanks to Parks and the Frist as well. You all are great partners as always. And yeah, we're really excited about the future of the engagement and hope you all continue to be engaged. Thanks everyone for attending and being flexible on Zoom with us. And please spread the word on the Wharf Park engagement and try to weigh in and give your input here so we can have a great asset for our city. So again, thanks to everyone for presenting, and we look forward to the future of Wharf.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.